You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming back to Mission Log Engage, the podcast that we actually made specifically for you, the YouTube audience that has come here to Roddenberry Entertainment to watch John and I talk about certain things and engage with each other.
That's the rule. That's what we're going to do. And today we have an email from Jeff that we will get into, and I feel like this is an email that is a great follow up to the previous Engage, because these are both kind of the same DNA in them. So let's just get right into it here. Jeff says, "The struggle is important." Hi, guys. Wanted to offer thoughts on what Star Trek is, quote, supposed to be. In your most recent episode, you rejected the notion of Starfleet having a dark side and seemed to indicate that Sisko's struggle with morality made this a bad episode of Star Trek. I appreciate these thoughts, but I also disagree. That's what we like. We like appreciation and disagreement. If we think about Star Trek as an analogy for our own society, we sometimes find that the analogy is imperfect. For instance, the Ferengi can be seen as an analogy for capitalism gone extreme. If we hold up Starfleet as a utopian paragon of society, we ignore the fact that building a better society will always be a struggle and never truly finished. When Trek shows us good people struggling with immoral decisions, it also shows us that moral decisions are always a struggle. When a society believes it has solved every social problem, it opens itself to corruption. See Section 31 and every bad admiral. But if a society acknowledges that there will always be room for progress, then it can continue to improve. In fact, when Trek shows these struggles, like in TNG's Drumhead and First Duty or DS9's Progress, we see officers working to overcome the flaws and in that struggle growing, like society should. Even if Sisko ultimately made the wrong choice in The Pale Moonlight, by showing his struggle, it affirms Star Trek's morality. So, interesting take there. And like I said, kind of related to the previous one, but a slightly different angle there. Norman, thoughts?
Well, the supposed to be thing is probably the biggest, center point here in this discussion, because this is all about subjectivity, objectivity, how we interpret what the Star Trek quote unquote brand is and what it's supposed to be. And I think that's going to be hit or miss for everybody based on what you want to get out of Star Trek. Star Trek, up to a point, again, it presented a very consistent outlook on the promise of humanity moving forward into the future and into the far future. And I like the examples that were brought in here, like the Drumhead, the First Duty, Progress, and how everything kind of builds up to this central discussion point that we always have about, say, like in The Pale Moonlight, because in The Pale Moonlight it's the linchpin really of any of these debates. What Sisko did, what Sisko chose to do, and the consequences or lack thereof that he had to deal with. That being said, at least in the Next Generation examples, especially the Drumhead and the First Duty, Picard, he didn't necessarily have to wrestle with his decisions. He was spotlighting like why we need to continue to combat these problems that keep arising within the Federation, as opposed to, say, what Sisko did in the Pale Moonlight by leaning headway into it. To try and at least provide some type of defense against the Dominion War. I understand that. I understand that his choices were obviously monumental. But at the same time, though, I didn't feel like, even though he confessed everything to his computer, if he really meant what he said, then why did he delete it? Right.
That is the huge dramatic choice in that episode, which is great. It is jaw dropping. And at the same time, you just go, okay, well, he never has to face that now. And that really is the difference in a decision like that, particularly when it it undermines, to me anyway, it may not to you or to others who are hearing this, but it undermines the moral authority that somebody in his position would then have. I mean, look at, we just talked about Inter Arma. That is an episode where Bashir learns the truth about what Section 31 is doing and how he's been manipulated by them. And that points to higher people in Starfleet. And at that point, it undermines the moral authority that that person has over Bashir. And Bashir, as challenged as he is by that, he gets to walk away with that knowledge. Nobody walks away with the knowledge of anything that Sisko did other than Sisko, and to an extent Garak, but, we know Garak's not telling anybody anything.
Oh, no, he's holding that card very close to his vest.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I get it that not. I feel like this is a point of contention that comes up when we do get comments like this, and it's not an issue of trying to hold DS9 or the characters in DS9 to some impossible standard and say they should always make the right decisions, and utopia should be utopia, and there should never be any problems. I realize that I'm sort of strawmanning that argument, but I'm doing that for a reason, to say that that is not my expectation of what DS9 should be, or even Star Trek as a whole should be. For me, what I'm looking for is that, again, when these problematic situations come along, that we're at least presented with some sort of moral alternative that really examines, like, what is the cost of making these bad decisions? What is the fallout from these things? And when yes, it might be perfectly realistic to say that a guy in Sisko's position could simply sweep it under the rug and get away with it. But even if we're just kidding ourselves into saying, oh, but he has to live with that in his conscience, I haven't really seen that since then. I really haven't. He's still somebody who has a moral authority over at least some of the people around him, and that struggle doesn't seem to be all that great.
Well, I mean, talking about a little bit more of the general terms of Jeff's email, I think that there's a choice that I think that fans make in the fandom. Do they want Star Trek to have these struggles within the promise of this utopian future as a fantasy? Because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know if the tenets of the Federation or the United Federation of Planets and Starfleet will ever exist. Or do they want a more realistic approach mirroring the time that we're in right now, with Star Trek trimmings and details that make it part of the science fiction fandom fantasy that they like watching on TV? So do you want, it's kind of like this yin and yang thing. Do you want the utopian version of it with a little bit of the harsh reality of real life? Mm-hmm. Or do you want the real life version of it with a little bit of the utopian fantasy of Star Trek's original promise? That's the struggle, I think, right now, especially with Deep Space Nine, because primarily the pushback that we've gotten a lot from the fans, they want this darker study of humanity in a show that's traditionally about studying the more optimistic side of humanity.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting observation to see overall when you look at it from 30,000 feet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much, Jeff, for that email. Really appreciate it. And, stay engaged with us, as all of you can, here at youtube.com/Roddenberry Entertainment on the Mission Log Engage playlist. And if you would like to send in your own comment, do so missionlog@roddenberry.com, or find us on Facebook and Twitter @MissionLogPod. And remember, we may engage with you and your comments on the air.